Hey, Fiveable friends. What a lovely August afternoon we're having. For some of you, it is the evening, but over here on the West Coast, we're still in the afternoon. In fact, my kids are running around outside throwing water balloons at each other, so they're not going to be nearly as prepared for the SATs and the ACTs as you are going to be. But that's okay because they're not quite ready for that yet. My name is Maria Guerra. Some of you might have known me from the AP macro crams, but today we're going to be talking about the SATs and the ACTs. And if you're wondering how I might know any of this stuff, I, believe it or not, did take the SAT once upon a time, many, many years ago. At the time, I didn't know enough about the ACT, so I really wish I had had the opportunity that you have today to learn about the two tests and the differences between them, because in hindsight, the ACT might have been better for me. So first, before we start, we're here at the Think Fiveable. You can connect with us on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube, on our website, all that good stuff. Of course, we also have our Discord channels going. We'd love to talk to you there. But today, we're going to be talking a little bit about the background of the SAT and the ACT, and then getting on some specifics of the two tests. They have a lot in common, but there are also some minute differences that can help you decide which one is best for you. And then we're going to spend some time actually talking about that, which test you should take, a little bit of generic time on study tips, and then some questions and answers. So like I said before, like many of the adults in your life, I took the SATs once upon a time and the PSATs. I also have kids who have been through the process, and I'm a high school teacher, so I'm pretty well versed with what's going on. So hopefully you can learn a little bit today that will make you feel a little bit more at ease. And one of my big things as a teacher is making sure that people realize that these decisions we make, which tests we're going to take or how we do on this test or what happens, is not going to determine the course of the rest of your life. Is it important? Heck yeah, totally, totally important. But should you put so much stake in it that it causes you anxiety or takes the joy out of your life? Absolutely not. So as we go through today, I want you to hear the information, feel comfortable with the information, and let it guide you. But try and remove that layer of anxiety that these tests bring on us, and just kind of go with the flow. So let's talk about why we even have an SAT and an ACT. And this is what I'm going to tell you, a fun fact that I just learned. Both the SAT and the ACT used to actually stand for something. They were acronyms. But in recent years, both the College Board and the group that puts together the ACT have decided that their test names are no longer acronyms. The SAT is just the SAT, it stands for nothing. And the ACT is just the ACT, and it stands for nothing. And as you're removing the anxiety from your life, I want you to remember that they stand for nothing. But there is a purpose to these tests, and they're used mostly in college admissions as a way to kind of put some standardization into the admissions process. You guys are in the middle of the college program here with Fiveable. So you know there's a lot of things that go into your college admissions. I mean, there's the physical application you're going to fill out. For many schools, there are essays or short answers, prompts. For some schools, there are letters of recommendation. They're going to look at your transcript. They're not only going to look at the grades on the transcript, but they're going to look at that strength of schedule. Like, what classes did you take? Were you taking AP Human Geography? Were you taking underwater basket weaving? Like, what were you trying to do? They're going to look at the volunteer work that you've done. They're going to look whether or not you had a job or took care of a family member. They're going to look at all sorts of things. And the list goes on and on and on. And why am I telling you all these things? Because the SAT and the ACT are just a small part. Now, they can be an important part, but it's just a part of the whole picture. And I want you guys to remember that. And things are a little weird now. I don't know if you noticed, but we've been living in a pandemic for the last year and a half. And that has pushed some changes that were maybe coming anyway. But nonetheless, it has pushed some things forward. So as I mentioned, I'm coming to you from sunny and very, very warm California. And here we have two state college systems or state university systems. We have the CSU system and the UC system. And both of those systems have said for next year, you don't need SATs, you don't need ACTs, you're good. But they've also said, if you wish to take them and you believe that they will strengthen your application, then go ahead. So that's where Fiveable comes into play. And we'll talk a little bit later about the Fiveable Cram for SAT and ACT. But here's an opportunity where you can work on something and take these tests and improve your scores by like mastering the ideas of these tests. And it can help you. And if it doesn't work out, it won't hurt you for a lot of schools, because a lot of schools have gone SAT, ACT optional. So I want everybody to remember that. And in saying that, I also have learned that, we have 50 states here in the United States. And some, there are also, of course, some of you are joining us from around the world. But there are some states that require one of these tests as like a graduation requirement or required for the state college system. Some states say it has to be the SAT. Some states say it has to be the ACT. Some states say you don't have to do either. And I want to bring that up right now because everybody's situation will be different. There is no cookie cutter answer here to a lot of the things we're going to talk about. So you have to do your due diligence. You have to look at, where do you want to go to school? What state do you live in? What requirements does your district or county or state hold for you? So definitely listen to me today. Definitely ask questions, which of course you can do on Mentimeter. But know that at the end of the day, you have to look into what you are planning to do to make the best decision for you. Okay? No cookie cutterness here. All right? Everybody's situation is different. And you might have some schools that you're applying to, which the SAT, ACT is still required and might hold a huge part of the admissions process. And you might have other schools you're applying to that are like, nah, bro, don't even send us your scores because we don't care. Okay, so you got to look into that and make sure you're doing the right thing for the schools you want to go to and for the states that you come from. Okay, so we're going to start with this like basic structure of the two tests. I wanted to put them next to each other so you can start to see some of the things they have in common, but also some of the differences. We're going to start with the SAT. I am much more familiar with the SAT, but I have to say they've changed the SAT quite a few times in the last 20 some odd years since I took this test. So we have, first of all, the evidence-based reading and writing section, which we used to just call the verbal section. It's essentially going through your knowledge of the usage of English language and reading comprehension and things like that. Okay, so that's section 1. Well, the first section of the SAT. Your score on that section will be between 200 and 800 points. So literally you write your name on the test, you've gotten 200 points, so way to go, good job. Okay, the other half of the SAT is the math section, which is also 200 to 800 points. When they come up with your composite score for the SAT, they take your evidence-based reading and writing score and your math score, and they add them together for a total of somewhere between 400 and 1,600 points. And I am so thankful they've gone back to 1,600 being that perfect SAT score. So I'm going to take you back on a little trip down memory lane. When I was in high school, 1,600 points was the maximum you could get. And I thought I had done pretty well on the SATs. I was in the 89th percentile. I was happy. And then 4 kids at my high school, my senior year, got perfect 1,600s. It made me feel not great about myself. But they went on to change the test quite a bit after that. And for a good amount of years, there was a writing section, a third section, and the test was out of 2,400. So maybe if you have an older brother, sister, cousin, or whatever, they're like, no, it's 3 sections, it's 2,400 points. And then they made that third section optional. So some kids were at a 1,600 and some were at a 2,400. But guess what they've done now? Beginning now, with the tests that are going to be offered starting this month, August, that writing section doesn't exist anymore. We are back to the good old days of 1,600 points being a perfect SAT score. There are some schools that offer the SAT during the school day to their students who will opt to still have the essay portion, but that is for the school and not part of like this official SAT anymore. So that is a big change that just happened. If you took the test in May or June, there was still that writing component. It's not there anymore. And as an aside, connected to the SATs but slightly separate, there were these things called the SAT-2 subject tests. And those are gone too. Wow, it's a good day for you guys. The AP program has become so large and so all-encompassing that they decided they didn't need those SAT-2 subject tests anymore. So they have gone the way of all things as well. So now your SAT is back to 2 sections, evidence-based reading and writing, and then math. Perfect score, 1,600. Okay, they do sometimes do super scoring in the SAT, where if you take it more than once, they'll add your highest evidence-based reading and writing score and your highest math score together. But like I said before, there's no cookie cutter. Every school is going to look at it in a different way. Okay, so now we're going to look at the ACT structure. The ACT, which also now stands for nothing, has 4 sections instead of 2. 4 sections, an English section, a math section, a reading section, and a science section. And each one of those sections, you can get a score of between 1 and 36. And instead of adding all of these sections together to give you your composite score, they find the average. And then because the ACT are such good folks, they round it up. So if you're like 21.5, then your composite is 22. So as you can see right off the bat, it's different in the way they present your scores. There is an optional writing section in the ACT still, but it is optional. As always, you should look and see the requirements of the schools you are applying to in order to decide whether or not you need to do that optional writing section. As there are 4 sections, they are averaged together. You're going to notice a little bit of intriguing things when you look at the balance of the sections, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so SAT structure, 2 sections added together, ACT structure, 4 sections averaged. 36 is a perfect score on the ACT. Anything in the high 20s and above is going to be a competitive score on the SAT. I would say anything over 1,200. Depends what kind of school you want to go to, obviously. But if you want to be in the more competitive side, you want to be 1,200 and over on that composite score. Some schools, some colleges will publish their SAT and ACT averages, means, medians, all those good things. Other schools will not. Some schools have minimums, other schools don't. So remember what I said about you got to do due diligence and look at each school and see what they want and what they require. I wasn't kidding. That's super, super important. So even though I started this slide with the SAT, and this whole presentation is called SAT, ACT, we're going to take a deeper dive into the ACT first, and I think you'll see why as we go through. So here are some specifics about the ACT. The ACT is offered 7 times this school year between September and July. Okay, the SAT and the ACT used to often coincide, the dates they were offered, but somewhere along the line, both companies realized that they would actually do more business if they didn't go up against each other. So they are usually not on the same Saturdays. As we mentioned before, there are 4 sections in the ACT. So we're going to start with the math section. And as we're talking about these things, I want you to like really use them and think about yourself as I'm talking about them. So this math section, they don't give you a formula sheet in their math section. So if memorizing formulas is not your thing, that's something you need to think about right here. Okay, there's no formula sheet. So if they ask you to find the equation of a circle, I mean, you're going to have to do that all on your own. You're going to have to remember that formula. That just happened to me on the GRE, you guys. And somehow I've remembered the equation of a circle formula, but they're not going to give you anything on the ACT, okay? You got to know all the formulas. Their math includes algebra, geometry, trig, statistics, all that stuff, but it is more trig and geometry heavy than the SAT. What does that mean? That means if geometry is your jam and you love like the shapes and spatial stuff, whoo, maybe the ACT is better for you because the ACT has more geometry in it. There's not a ton of trig, so if hearing the word trig like makes you shake in your boots, don't freak out. But there is more trig than there is in the SATs. It is more basic trig, the kind of trig concepts you will look at in geometry and at the beginning of trig, not something that you have to be a trig genius to do. For the ACT, you can use your calculator in the whole math section. There are no rules about calculator usage, and you'll see why that's important when we talk about the SAT. Another big difference is the ACT has 5 answer choices in the math section, 5. And so here we're going to do some math right now. If you were just going to guess, you have a 1 in 5 chance of guessing the right answer, which is 20%. Okay. Okay, so that's the math section. English section. English section looks at the purpose, focus of a piece, knowledge of language, and then here bolded conventions of standard English. Why did I bold that, you guys? Let's make a conjecture here. Let us analyze this and think, why might this be bolded? It's bolded because, drum roll please, that is what most of the questions are about. That's like more than 50% of the English sections, the conventions of standard English. And you might be wondering, what are conventions of standard English? Well, the way we are supposed to write, the usage of the proper vocabulary, the proper punctuations, understanding how those things connect to the writing. Okay, so that's the English section. Then there's a reading section separate from the English section. And here you're going to read passages. Not that there won't be any, there could be little short passages in the English section, but these are those longer passages. The ones that, correct me if I'm wrong, we all thoroughly dislike reading and then answering questions about, and you're sitting there and you're like, this test is really important. I got to read this passage. I got to read it thoroughly. I got to love it. And like halfway through, you wonder what you just read. That's the reading section, okay? So you're going to read passages, and then they're going to ask a bunch of questions about this bolded one, key ideas and details. Most of the questions are going to be about that. And then some questions about structure, and then being able to understand or differentiate between facts and opinions. That's the reading section. And then there's a science section. And we're going to take a step back into my life here and realize that the only thing I knew about the ACT back in 1998 when I took the SATs was that there was a science section. And what did I know about science? Nothing. So I didn't even look into the ACT anymore. Oh my God, I don't know any science. There's no way I can take this science test. Well, guess what? Do you need some basic scientific knowledge, background? Yeah. Is it really a science test? No. In the end, I think I would have actually done better on the ACT than the SAT because it's a lot more about interpreting data and understanding research, looking at different viewpoints with that scientific background, but not a hardcore scientific background. They're not expecting you to have a master's degree in chemistry. They know that you're a high school student. A little bit of science background. Yeah, like maybe you remember what photosynthesis is. I actually still remember that, but, which is crazy considering the fact that, as I tell my students now, I do not science. So don't be afraid of this science section if science isn't your thing. It's called science, but it's not science in the way you might think. Okay, so those are the specifics about our ACT, the 4 sections, what they cover. If you remember from the previous slide, 4 sections averaged together. What does that mean? We can learn some things if we just sit here for a second and think about it. On the SAT, we're going to add our 2 sections together. So the English section and the math section are each basically worth about 50%. But in the ACT, there are 4 sections, and when it's averaged together, now our math section is only worth a quarter of our score. So if you're not feeling super hot on the math section, maybe the ACT is better for you because it's not going to be worth as much in your score. Of course, you'd have to be decent at math to realize that, or have me here to tell you that. Okay, so that's like one of those little things you want to keep in mind when you're trying to decide which one of these tests is right for you. Okay, on to the SAT. Also offered 7 times, but notice the first test is in August. It's in just a few weeks. I think you can actually still register without a late fee for the next couple of days. And after that, there will be a late fee. By the way, the prices of these 2 tests are pretty comparable. So I certainly wouldn't choose based on the fact that one of the tests is like $8 cheaper than the other. But it's offered 7 times between August and June. There are 2 sections, like we mentioned before. The math section, which now will be worth 50% of your score because there are only 2 sections, that they give you a formula sheet. So if you can't remember the equation of a circle and fun things like that, you don't have to. It's literally there in your SAT packet when you're taking your test. And for some people, knowing that that's there is enough to help you ease your mind so that you can do better. So that's something to keep in mind for the SAT. There are 2 math parts within the math section. One is called Math No Calculator, and it doesn't take an English genius to understand that Math No Calculator means that you don't get to use your calculator. Yikes. For some of you, you're like, I don't need my calculator. And for others of you, that calculator is a beautiful, beautiful crutch that you don't want to give up. Okay? But there is also a section where you can use your calculator. One no calculator, one with calculator. So there's another difference between the SAT and the ACT. The ACT, you can use your calculator in the whole math section. Also, there are these things called grid-in questions. That means there are no answers in front of you. You literally do the math problem and then you grid it in. You write it down and then you fill in bubbles that correspond to the numbers that you believe are the answer. That means that those questions are no longer multiple choice. There are 13 of those grid-in questions on the SATs. So if you're feeling good about your math skills, you're like, heck yeah, I don't need answer choices to my questions. Maybe the SAT is better for you. Another big thing is that the SAT only has 4 answer choices in the math section. And if you go back to the little bit of mental math we did earlier, that means you have a 1 in 4 chance of choosing a correct answer, which is 25%, which is 5% more than it would be on the ACT. Okay, only 4 answer choices on the SAT. All right, and then you have your evidence-based reading and writing section. And this is why I put the SAT specifics after the ACT specifics. Essentially, those 2 parts of the ACT that are basically English, the English part and the reading part, is what you will find on the SATs. The questions are very similar. Okay? There's questions where you read a passage and then you answer questions about it. And then there's other things where you look at the conventions of English language, the writing language, all of that good stuff. Sometimes there'll be a shorter passage, they'll underline a sentence. What does this mean? What is the author trying to convey? That kind of stuff. The same type of questions that you would find on the ACT in those 2 sections, but in one part of the test. Okay? Kind of a tricky thing they do here is in the reading part of the SATs, as you're reading a passage, the questions will come out of the passage in a chronological order. So if they're going to ask you a question about something that's in the first paragraph of the reading, they will ask you that question before they ask you a question that comes from a later paragraph. The ACT, however, does not guarantee that those questions will be in any kind of chronological order. So it could ask you a question about later in the passage before it asks you a question about earlier in the passage. So if that's the kind of thing that you think might trip you up, it's something to keep in mind. Okay, so we've gone through the specifics of the 2. And now you're sitting here and you're even more like, wow, which one of these tests do I take? So let's talk about that. My suggestion, take them both. Why not? Now, that doesn't mean you have to like pay to take them both right now. There are so many released exams on the internet for both the SAT and the ACT, official ones on their websites, free ones that other companies give you. They're all over the place. There's no reason why you can't sit down and take a full-length test for the ACT and a full-length test for the SAT. In fact, as you like go down the road of prep for these tests, whichever one you choose or both, you would want to start with a practice test anyway. You want to see where you are before you figure out your plan so that you can get to where you need to be. So my big suggestion is to take both. But maybe you're feeling a little bit of senioritis, or you're taking like 12 AP classes and working 80 hours a week, and you're like, hey, lady, Fiveable lady, I can't take both of these tests. I don't even have time to take a practice test for both. I just want to pick the one that's better for me, the one that I'm going to be more successful on, and I want to put all my eggs in one basket. All right, that's fine. So here's some things to keep in mind as we make that decision. First of all, I will go back and remind you that you must go look at the websites of all of the colleges that you are interested in and make sure that you are covering all of your bases with them. Basically, every school in the United States will take either SAT or ACT, okay? But double check that your state doesn't have a requirement, that your school doesn't have a requirement. And once you get all of those things that you have no control of out of the way and figured out, then you can start looking at these other pieces. By the way, just a side note suggestion. I'm sure you're all working or worked on your list of colleges that you would like to attend. As you are figuring them out and you're keeping your list of the name of the school, and then hopefully you're putting next to it, like, I don't know, the admissions due date and the requirements, whether you need essays or letters of recommendation and stuff like that. But you should also put whether or not they require standardized tests, and if they have a preferred one, and if they have a limit as to when that test can come from. For example, here in California, the UC system, that would be like UCLA, Berkeley, all those types of schools, their applications are due November 30th, but they will accept SAT scores from the December test. So those are the kind of things that you want to know in advance. Okay, so when you're making your college list, make sure to include information about the standardized testing they require and the due dates and all of those things as well. So let's look at this a little bit more methodically instead of me just saying, hey, take both tests. So things to remember. As we mentioned before, the ACT has more geometry and trig ideas. Again, those trig ideas are not like upper level college level trig. It's the trig that you will find within geometry and then at the beginning of trig. Nothing too complicated, but again, if geometry and trig are not your thing, maybe the ACT isn't your thing. Then again, maybe math isn't your thing at all, which then makes the ACT your thing because the math section has less weight in your composite score. Okay, lots of things to consider here. And here's a big thing that we haven't talked about yet. The SAT gives you more time for every question. So if you need a little more time and you don't want to feel rushed, maybe that makes the SAT the test for you. Or you might be like me, where you're like, either I know it or I don't, and I just want to go through and I do it, and I finish every test early, which doesn't mean I did well, and it also doesn't mean I did poorly. And the time constraint isn't a big deal. then that doesn't matter to me. All right, you have to think about yourself. I also happen to coach academic decathlon where we answer, 50 questions in 30 minutes on a regular basis. So for my Academic students, they don't need more time per question. That doesn't help them. But for others, it does help them. So the SAT, you have about 10 or 15 seconds more for each question than you do on the ACT. As I mentioned before, the math section has less weight in the composite score on the ACT. And I failed to mention earlier, which I apologize, that the ACT also does superscoring, which means if you took the test more than once officially, they would take the highest score from each section and then do your composite. So if I took it like 2 times, they would take my highest math score between the two, my highest science score between the two, my highest reading score, my highest English score, and they would add those 4 together and then average them. And remember, they add up when they do they round up when they do the average. So because there's only one math section out of 4, it is now has less weight in your composite score than the math would on the SATs. All right, and then we're a reminder that the College Board is so friendly and the fact that they provide you with formulas. Thank God for those formulas. If you can't remember them, then that's a good crutch to have. All right, but I tried to alternate these. Oh, that test sounds good. Oh, but now this one sounds good. Oh, but now this one sounds good, because so you realize that there are so many variables here. Don't forget that the ACT includes that science section. The science section that's not really science. The one that if you are logical, you might do very well at. I actually feel like the science section in the ACT reminds me a little bit of the logic section in the LSAT. And I know you guys are not ready for LSATs yet, but maybe some of you are want to be lawyers one day and you already know what the LSAT is, but it's essentially like the SAT that you take to get into law school. And there's a whole logic section in there. If that's your jam, then maybe the ACT science section is good for you too. All right. Obviously, if you love science and you're good at science, then yes, that would be helpful as well. But don't discount the ACT because it has a science section. Also, keep in mind that within the SAT, even though there's those 2 main sections, when they give you your score, they're also like sub-scores. And one of the sub-scores for the SAT is actually a science sub-score, because there will be questions in the reading passages that have to do with science ideas. So you will get some kind of scientific sub-score. But a bit about the sub-scores is that most colleges are not going to look at them. That's kind of just like for your own good, if you're going to take the test again, to see which areas you would want to study and improve on the most. All right. The SAT reading, as I mentioned earlier, presents questions in the order they come in the passage. They say that it's done chronologically. So the beginning of the passage questions would come before questions from the end of the passage. And I cannot say this enough. I kind of feel like it's like this disclaimer, like when you hear an ad for prescription medication that it might do this, 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 and this. Check your state and school requirements. Yeah. I don't want any sad kids on the last day that are like, I learned from the Fiveable lady that I would be better at the ACT, and I did not check that I needed to take the SAT in my state. Okay, so make sure you check your state and school requirements as well. So before we take some questions in a few minutes, I'm going to talk about some really simple study tips. The SATs, the ACT are overwhelming. I can only guess that many of you have taken AP tests before. And you know that feeling, that overwhelming feeling. You walk in and you're like, oh, I got to take this big test, this important test. How am I going to prepare for this test? So I'm going to start by telling you that doing a little bit every day can help. Of course, there's a good chance that you are a senior and you're joining us right now and you're like, well, the do a little every day ship has kind of sailed for me, because school's about to start and I got to take my SAT so that my scores are ready in time for my college admissions. You can still do a little every day. You just don't have as many days to do that a little bit every day. Okay, but don't fear. Start now. Start today. Why should you not fear? Because of this next point. A lot of the stuff on the test is things you already know. You're not taking AP chemistry where you spend the whole year learning about the chemistry that's going to be on the test. There's no class for the SATs and the ACTs. You have actually been preparing for these tests your entire educational career, even all the way back in kindergarten when you learned how to read. This is stuff that in theory you already know. You've probably done the math before. Do you need a refresher? Yeah, totally get it. If you don't use it, you lose it, right? You might need a refresher. Or maybe your vocabulary isn't splendid. You can't remember words like penultimate and plethora, two of my favorite SAT words ever. So maybe you need a refresher there. Maybe you need to practice your word roots to help you figure out what words mean. Things like that. Yes, those are great. They're refreshers. They are going over information you already know. Information that is somewhere in your brain stored away. So if you can release the anxiety of the test and remember that you know these things already and you're just refreshing your memory, that can go a long way in your preparation for the test. Next, study tip. Take a practice test, or 2 or 3. This is also, remember, when you're trying to decide which one of these tests you want to take, the practice test is a really good place to start. My suggestion, in a perfect world, in a perfect study world, you would take a practice test. And then you would use that information to create a study plan. And you would follow your study plan, and then you would take another practice test, and then you would see what little things maybe you wanted to learn, spend a little bit more time with, and then spend a little bit more time with those things, and then you would go and you would take your actual exam. This does several things for you, especially when you figure out those sub-scores on the SAT. It guides you on how to study, which is great. It shows you like where you're lacking and where you're proficient. But even more importantly, it helps you feel better about the structure of the test. So I'm going to talk about myself again for a second because that's what I love to do. I just took the GRE recently. And the GRE is like essentially the SAT or ACT, but for graduate school, because I'm going back to get my doctorate. And when I started with a practice test. I took my own advice. I took my practice test, went through. I got an okay score. I was like, this is good enough, but I'd like to work at it. And so I went back to see which sections I needed to work on. And I also realized that in one of the sections, I was answering every question incorrectly. Not because of lack of knowledge, because of a lack of familiarity with the test structure. The test was asking me for 2 answers for each one, and I was a bad student and did not read the directions, and I only gave 1 answer for each one. So even if that 1 answer was one of the right answers, I automatically got all those questions wrong because I had not read the instructions carefully. Well, when I saw I did poorly on that section and then used some of my study time to specifically work on that section, I also used some of my study time to reread the instructions. And that's when I realized the fatal mistake I had made. Now, if I had not taken a practice test and not done some studying and not been familiar with the structure of the test, I would have gone and paid $200 to take the GRE, and I would have gotten all those questions wrong again because I wouldn't have read the instructions. And that's what's so awesome about practice tests. Yes, we don't want to read long passages. Yes, we don't want to do more math than we have to. But think about the feeling you get when you're comfortable. You're like, I know what they're going to ask me about. I know how they're going to ask me. I am familiar enough with this test that is not providing me anxiety. I feel comfort in the familiarity of what I know. And that is why practice tests are amazing. So don't just take one to determine which test you're going to take. Take a couple to really get yourself comfortable, not just with the way the questions are asked and the instructions, but with the timing. Because remember, all of these tests are timed. So you have to feel good about the amount of time you have and moving through your questions at the right speed. So definitely practice tests are fantastic. All right. Next, obviously, Fiveable, you got an email today. I got the email in 3 different email accounts from our favorite Amanda, introducing the 10-day Cram for the SAT, ACT. And I used to be a believer in like that you can't cram for the SAT or ACT, but then I realized and reminded myself that we already know these things, like we talked about earlier. So the cram isn't like, oh, I'm learning all this stuff for the first time, because you can't really cram that way. The cram is that refresher. Hey, you remember that geometry knowledge that you haven't used in 2 years? Here's a little refresher to bring that out of the deep storage in our brain and in somewhere more accessible. So when we take our test, we can use it. So the Fiveable people worked really hard, and I was going to help make all those reviews. And then I got sidetracked studying for the GRE. But they have put together a really awesome 10-day cram for the ACT and 10-day cram for the SAT. And the price is like so ridiculously cheap. There's really no reason not to do it. It's coming from some of our top-notch teachers, and I guarantee you guys, it will help you with these tests. It won't be too time consuming. You'll have access to it. You'll first, of course, take your practice test and then do your 10-day cram, take another one. Your score is definitely going to go up. So how blessed are you guys to have that opportunity? In my day, wow, I sound old. The internet was a thing, but it wasn't a thing like the way it is today. I certainly couldn't talk to a whole bunch of people while sitting in my daughter's room on the internet. We couldn't do that. And if we wanted to do an SAT or ACT prep class, you had to go every Saturday, and they were like $1,200. And it was like, who wants to spend their Saturday doing that? And things are different, and you have this opportunity, and that Fiveable 10-day cram is a fantastic opportunity. And the last study tip I want to give you comes from me as like a mother and a advocate for self-care and just like breathing. And that's just breathe. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves, especially in this day and age, to get into the school that we think will be the best school for us. And we get to this point where we think if we don't get into this school, our whole world's going to end. And if we don't do well on the SATs or ACTs, we'll never get into that school. And then you put so much pressure, and it piles and piles and piles on top of yourself that it actually hurts you when you're trying to get into that school, because you have so much stress that you're not sleeping well. And things like that. So just breathe. These tests don't determine the entirety of your future. Does it help you? If you figure out how to take them and you get a good score, will that help you get into college? Absolutely. Why not do that? Great. But it's not like the flip side is true, that if you do really poorly, like your world is over and you're going to like, I'm trying to think of a job that nobody would want to have without offending anybody. And I don't think I can think of anything good. So I won't say anything. But not doing well on one of these tests isn't going to end your hopes and dreams, your aspirations, the things you want to do. So if you can remember that, it will actually help you do better. Breathing, sleeping, eating well, going out into the outdoors, getting some vitamin D. All those things sound silly. Drinking enough water, add that one in there too. They all sound silly, but I tell you, they're life-changing. Your brain can function so much better if you take all of those things into account. Okay, so that was like a little touchy-feely there. And some people are like, no, I just need to study for the test. But you also got to take care of your bodies, because your bodies hold your brains, and your brain is what you need to do well. Okay, so we're going to do Q&A. I am 40 seconds early, but I think that's pretty good. A lot of you have already found the Q&A, so I'm going to be looking at that in a second. But if you haven't found it yet, there's a QR code. I'm happy to answer questions. I am not egotistical. If I don't know the answer to a question, I will not pretend to know, but we will find the answers together. You can also go to menti.com and type in this code. All right, so let's see. Roughly how long after you take either test do you get the results? It's about 3 weeks for both tests. and that makes me want to tell you this other funny story. I expect when I took the GRE that I would have to wait 3 weeks to get my test results, just like the SATs, ACTs. I mean, that's what you're used to. Or if you're an AP student, you're used to waiting an eternity for your test results. And then I like finished my GRE, which you take on a computer, which already makes it different than the SAT and the ACT. And then my test results were just like in front of me on the screen. It was a scary day, a scary day. So it takes about 3 weeks. It's a short enough period of time that you don't stress too much and that you can kind of give yourself a little bit of time off from studying. A lot of people take the test twice. And if you're going to do so, I would say, like, let's say you were going to take the August test. I wouldn't also sign up for September. I would sign up for October. That gives you time to get your results and to like look at your results and see what you need to study, and then actually time to study more. If you're not going to study in between taking the tests, then there's really not a point in taking it again. Okay, so like if you're not going to use the data that you get from the first time you take the test, your sub scores, and look, and then use that to create a revised study plan and study those things and then take the test again. If you're not going to do it that way, then there's almost no point in taking the test again. All right, let's see. How does the Superscore for SAT work? If I get a bad score on one test, will it pull down my future scores? No. Most schools will take your Superscore, which would be your highest, I keep forgetting what they call it now, the evidence-based reading and writing section, and your highest math, and they add it together. So that's something to keep in mind. The chances of you taking the test and then going and taking it again and your score going down significantly are very small unless there's some kind of catastrophe. Usually you would see your score either stay pretty even or go up. But it won't pull down your future scores. It doesn't matter whether you do ACT with or without writing. Ooh, okay. I would say at this point, most colleges are not looking for you to take that writing section. So many colleges weren't requiring it that's a lot of the reason why the College Board got rid of it on the SAT. A lot of kids weren't taking it. It wasn't, sadly enough, profitable for them anymore. But remember what I said about like, oh yeah, make sure that you check the requirements of your school. Make sure you check the requirements of your school. I know when my daughter took the ACT, she chose not to take the writing section because most of us do not get joy out of writing essays on standardized tests. So, but it just depends on the school that you're applying to. How long should one study to make a big improvement in their score? That's a really good question. I would say that at least a chunk of 10 hours if you want to see an improvement. Less than that, you're like, oh, my mom bought me an SAT review guide, and then you kind of like look at it for 10 minutes. That's not studying. Certainly going through that 10-day Fiveable Cram, that would improve your scores. And it says, how do you study in depth to do so? Practice test. Look and analyze your practice test results. Look and see what didn't go so well, what did go well, and then spend your time on the things that you think you can improve the most on. It wouldn't be Fiveable if I didn't talk about economics for a second. So there's a concept in economics called opportunity cost. And we talk about it a lot in my decathlon because there's some subjects that it would take the kids 10 hours to grasp and another subject that might only take them 2 hours to grasp. So your opportunity cost of spending 10 hours on the one that's going to be really hard for you is that you're giving up improvement that could be happening in other sections. So you should start with the things that you think you need, that a little refresher will go a long way. So math skills that you've done before, but you just don't remember. There is something you would want to study. I would leave the new content. Perhaps there's some math on there that you haven't gotten to yet. I would leave that kind of stuff till the end. Any kind of things that places where you see you could make a big improvement with less effort. In terms of studying in depth, going through the Cram, taking notes through the Cram, doing practice problems, practice tests, going back and going through your practice problem with answers and checking to see where you got it wrong. Like taking the practice test is great. Marking down what you got right or wrong is great. But the real benefit is to go to the ones you got wrong and figure out why they're wrong and figure out what you needed to do to make them right. That's where you get the most bang for your buck out of that practice test. All right. Is there any way to improve your reading score? I've heard some teachers say reading books will help more. Well, I'm a firm believer in reading anyway. I think reading is fantastic. How do you improve your reading score? Yeah, practice does make perfect. So more reading, more exposure to reading and analyzing will help you. The review sessions as part of the Fiveable 10-day cram will also help you immensely because they'll give you some tips and tricks. Because at the end of the day, these are standardized tests, right? There are people out there that know them so well that they can tell you the kind of distractors like the College Board or the ACT will put in there. And they'll help you work through those. And those are some ways that you can also improve your reading score. Definitely the more you read, the more you'll be able to understand as well. And also reading's really cool, in my humble opinion. Hello, hi. Is it possible for a school to accept both SAT and ACT scores but still have a preference between them? Yes, but if they do, they will tell you. There's no like secrets. It's not like UCLA is going to be like, we'll take either, but there's somebody in the back room that's like, if you send us an ACT score, we're never going to accept you. It's nothing like that. They will tell you if they do have a preference. But really, the preference is going to be more on your end. Which one do you feel more comfortable with? If you are wanting to improve your score, but the test dates are after you apply, would you apply with test optional, then change it when you improve your score? Ooh, that's a good question. Because this test optional thing, this is new. You can thank COVID for this test optional. I would not give them my score until it was a score that I felt good about if it's test optional. That is my Maria Guerra's opinion. And then I would send scores over if I liked where they improved. But I would also say, and I, by the way, am the queen of procrastinating. My Fiveable friends will tell you that. I knew I was going to do this for a long time, and I was like, I'm going to make my slides on Wednesday. And then I got stuck in Ohio, and then I procrastinate like the best of you guys. And even though I do that, I will argue with you right now, not argue, suggest. It is August 5th, and you have more than enough time to take the test twice before any of your stuff is due. So there you go. All right. Also, there are office hours, and there is a guidance counselor. Her name is Jessica. She can also help you guys. You can also get her opinion as well. How early do you need to register for these exams? They're actually pretty generous with when you register. It's about 3.5 weeks before the test to not pay a late fee. You can register even closer to the test if you got lots of money and want to pay a late fee. But piggybacking on what I just said about procrastinating, I'm sure you're all about to start school, right? Some of you are unlucky and you live in places where the school year has already started this week. But I really think like this weekend, make yourself a plan. Like, all right, I'm going to take the practice test this day, the other practice test this day. I'm going to decide which one I'm going to take, and then choose a test date, and then register for it, pay for it, and then backwards plan. That's what as teachers do. We backwards plan. Backwards plan your prep. And that way you're registered early. There's no stress. What if my computer internet goes out when I need to register? There's no late fees. And it gives you a hard deadline, something you have to work toward. So I would register early, and then you won't have to worry about that kind of stuff. What topics are heavily tested for SAT math? Algebra and statistics. Really, it's the same concepts on the two tests. There's just more geometry on the ACT, and there isn't any trig on the SAT. But again, sitting and taking a practice test will help you get a good grasp on the kind of questions they will answer. Can I take the SAT, ACT after graduation of high school? I'm going to say 100% I don't know, but I'm not sure why you would. And now I will tell a story about my daughter who had straight A's in high school and took the ACT and did actually pretty well on it. I attribute that to the science section. And then she decided to leave high school early. And in doing so, she went to community college and then applied to transfer to schools later, which is, I guess, a reason why you might take the SAT, ACT after you graduate, if you're deciding to transfer. And you know what none of those schools asked her for? Her ACT score. She had this awesome ACT score. I think it was like a 32. And nobody cared because she was transferring. It's really only important for freshman admissions. So I'm not sure if you can take it after you graduate, but if you were thinking about it because you wanted to transfer somewhere, they're not going to ask you for it, and it becomes a lot less important than it did for freshman admissions. My school recommends studying for the SAT in January and taking it in the spring, but I want to study and take it earlier. How do I go about signing up for the test independently? That's a great idea. I'm going to guess that maybe you're a junior and not a senior, in which case, kudos to you for looking at this already now. I took the SAT for the first time my junior year as well. You can just go to the website, College Board or ACT, and you can just sign up for it on your own. And then they're offered on Saturdays at different school locations. In the past few years, it's become a thing where schools actually offer it. I know my school district offers it one day in the spring each year, and all 11th graders take it, and they all get to take it for free. The school district covers it, which is really awesome. But the best way to make use of that time is to actually prep for it, and definitely taking it before that and making that your second go around is super useful. So you can sign up on either website on your own. You do not need anything from your school. You just need your parents' credit card information. All right. Is the Khan Academy SAT prep program a good resource to use as a homeschooler? There's good stuff on there. I would argue that there's better stuff on Fiveable. Am I allowed to do that? I should do that. Fiveable has become like a real love of mine, a passion. I honestly don't have time to do the things I do for Fiveable, but I love it so much that I do. And this prep program that's being put together is really great. Really, really great. Khan Academy is cool too. It exists. It's free. It's on the internet. There's no harm in doing it. They also have practice tests, and it kind of gives you a plan as to what to study. But I would also start with the 10-day cram from Fiveable. All right. Are we on our last question? Dun, dun, dun. So College Board likes to not give you your scores until the registration date for the next due date passed. You know why they do that, right? Because they can make more money. Oh, the College Board. Don't we love them? We love to love them. Okay. Is it worth double registering just in case you somehow bomb your last test? I go back to my previous suggestion of planning to take your two test dates apart. So for my students, they're usually applying to the UCs. So the latest test date they can take is December. So I usually suggest to them to take October and December if they're going to take two. October is far enough away from where we are right now that you have time to study. So I would take October and then see how it goes, and then December if that fits into your cutoff. Unless like you went into your test and like you threw up in the middle and you didn't get to finish and you know it was really bad, I think it's much better to wait for your scores, because waiting for your scores allows you to see where you need to improve and allows you to make that study plan. And if you don't use the data, then as I said before, your score isn't actually going to improve just by you taking the test again. Ooh, a new one. Are there any other good study resources besides Khan Academy and Fiveable? There are some very expensive other resources out there. Are they worth the money? In my humble opinion, no. I think at the end of the day, you can do a lot with personal drive, with grit, with your own motivation. If you've never read the book Grit, I highly recommend reading it. It'll change your life. You have to have the drive, and with your own personal drive, Khan Academy and Fiveable will be more than enough for you. Those other courses are for people that need somebody to beat that drive into them. And if you're rich, why spend that money now when you can use it for college? Yeah. Okay, that's all the questions, and it's 5 o'clock. That worked out smashingly well. I had a lot of fun with you guys. Thank you for joining us today. You can also email us. There's the email. You can also keep in touch with us on all these other cool places, like Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. And of course, there is that college counselor that is available through the college program. And you can talk to her during office hours and ask questions in Discord and all of that stuff. But we are all honestly always here to help. And that's what makes Fiveable different. And I'd like to think better than a lot of these other places. So I genuinely had a great time with you guys today, and I'm super happy that this is over. And the feeling of relief I have right now is the same feeling of relief you will have when you are done with your SATs and your ACTs. Good luck, everybody, and we're so happy to know you.